From lions to venomous snakes and even killer pet wolves, the bond between humans and animals can sometimes take a tragic turn. These are the real-life stories of people who lost their lives to their exotic pets after they underestimated their animal instincts. Story 1. Marius Els had always considered himself a man of the land, someone who understood the delicate balance of nature. He had been a farmer in South Africa, living in the rolling fields and wild rivers. His connection to the animals on his farm was undeniable, and he believed in the power of relationships with creatures most people would be terrified of. That belief led him to an extraordinary bond with one of Africa's most dangerous animals, a hippopotamus named Humphrey. Humphrey wasn't just any hippo. He had been rescued by Marius as a calf, found abandoned after a flood had swept through the area. With no family to turn to, the young hippo found a home on Marius' farm. Over the years, Marius nurtured the animal, feeding him, caring for him, and, in many ways, treating him just like an oversized pet. Humphrey grew rapidly, soon towering over any animal on the farm. Marius marveled at how this creature, often considered one of the most aggressive animals in Africa, was affectionate toward him. The hippo would follow Marius around, and incredibly, Marius even rode on Humphrey's back, a sight that left many in his village amazed and equally uneasy. Marius often dismissed the concerns people voiced about keeping such a dangerous animal. "He's like a son to me," Marius would say, laughing off suggestions that Humphrey could ever turn violent. He had made several appearances on local media, proudly showing off his relationship with the massive creature, talking about how hippos were misunderstood. Humphrey, he claimed, was different. But underneath this facade of beloved pet, there had been troubling signs. The hippo had displayed moments of aggression in the past. Once, he had chased a pair of canoeists who ventured too close to the river where he roamed. Humphrey had forced them to scramble into a tree to avoid him, leaving them stranded for hours. There were also reports that Humphrey had killed several cows, displaying a violence that Marius brushed off as standard territorial behavior. Yet despite these incidents, Marius remained firm in his trust of the animal. He and Humphrey shared an unbreakable bond, or so he thought. It was a warm day in November 2011 when that illusion was shattered. Marius had gone out, as usual, to check on Humphrey by the river, but this time, something was different. Whether it was a flash of anger, confusion, or simply an unpredictable wild instinct, Humphrey attacked Marius without warning. The 2,600-pound hippo bit into Marius repeatedly, gouging him with his powerful jaws. Marius struggled, but there was no way to fight back against the massive beast he had cared for all these years. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Marius's lifeless body was found in the river, the very place where he had first found Humphrey as a baby. The media quickly picked up the story, shocked that a man who had seemed so close to one of the most dangerous animals on Earth had met such a brutal end at its hands, or rather, its jaws. Local stories covered the death of Marius Els, reminding viewers that wild animals, no matter how much love or care they receive, are still wild at heart. Even in the most controlled environments, their natural instincts can surface in a heartbeat, with devastating consequences. Marius had always believed he could tame the untamable, but in the end, Humphrey, the hippo he loved like a child, proved that nature is a force no one can truly control. For Marius, the price of that lesson was his life. Story 2. From one animal lover to another, Kellyanne Walls had always had a passion for animals, a love that led her to a life far from the ordinary. She and her husband, Michael, lived on a farm in Pennsylvania, but unlike most people, their animals weren't just chickens or cows. They kept lions, tigers, jaguars, and even a black bear named Teddy. Kelly had raised Teddy since he was a cub. He was her pride and joy, and she had no fear of the large, physically imposing bear. For her, Teddy was part of the family, another animal that she could train and take care of. She believed she understood him, knew his habits and temperament better than anyone else. Teddy wasn't like the wild bears you'd see in the woods. He had been raised in captivity since birth, and Kelly trusted him. After all, he had never harmed her. But those who knew Kelly worried. They knew that despite all her affection for Teddy, he was still a wild animal, unpredictable and dangerous. No amount of love could change that. One Sunday evening in 2009, Kelly went to clean Teddy's cage. This was part of her routine, nothing out of the ordinary for her. She had raised this bear for nearly a decade, and the routine of caring for him had become second nature. As she often did, Kelly tossed a shovelful of dog food to one side of the cage, hoping to keep Teddy occupied while she cleaned the other side. It was something she had done many times before, and she believed it was a safe enough distraction for the bear. But this day was different. In an instant, the bear attacked. Teddy's primal instincts surfaced, and he lunged at Kelly with the force of a beast that weighed several hundred pounds. She had no chance to escape, no time to call for help. The attack was swift and brutal. The sound of the struggle must have been horrifying, as her children playing nearby witnessed the entire attack. They screamed for help, desperate to save their mother, but there was nothing they could do. They watched as the bear she had nurtured from a cub, tore into her without mercy. The neighbors, hearing the screams, rushed to the scene and called for emergency services, but it was too late. By the time help arrived, Kelly was gone. Her lifeless body lay in the enclosure. The dream of taming a wild creature shattered in the most horrific way. The bear, now seen as a lethal threat, had to be put down. Kelly's death shocked the local community and the nation. It wasn't just the brutality of the attack that horrified people, it was the tragic irony. For nearly a decade, she had believed that her bond with Teddy, her training, her care, and her trust would keep her safe. But wild animals, no matter how long they live with humans, still carry their wild instincts. The experts, who had warned for years that bears could never be domesticated, were tragically proven right. Kelly's husband, Michael, had previously been licensed to keep exotic animals, but that license had expired by the time of the attack. Authorities quickly raised questions about the safety of keeping such dangerous creatures as pets, sparking debates across the state about the need for stricter regulations. The attack also devastated her family, especially her children, who had seen their mother's life end in such a traumatic and unimaginable way. Story 3. Our next animal on the list isn't as fierce as a lion or strong as a bear, but just as deadly. Terry Vance Garner was a man of simple habits. He had lived his whole life in the rural parts of Oregon, where farming was not just a job, but a way of life. He took pride in his land, his crops, and especially his animals. But alongside the usual cows and chickens, Terry also raised a different kind of livestock: hogs. These weren't just ordinary pigs. They were massive, weighing hundreds of pounds each. To Terry, they were just another part of his farm. But others knew that pigs could be dangerous, especially when they grew so big. On a cool day in 2012, Terry set out to do his usual chores. Part of those chores was feeding the hogs. He entered their enclosure just as he had done countless times before. He had raised these hogs from piglets and knew their personalities, or so he thought. The animals had always seemed relaxed enough around him, but there was something about their sheer size and power that gave an uneasy feeling to anyone who visited the farm. When Terry didn't return from the hog pen later that day, his family grew worried. It wasn't like him to disappear, especially when there was work to be done. They went out to check on him, expecting to find him finishing up his chores or maybe dealing with an animal that had escaped. But what they discovered was far more horrific. In the hog enclosure, they found pieces of Terry, just bones and fragments of his body. The rest had been consumed by the very animals he had raised. His family could barely comprehend what had happened. It was an unthinkable sight. Their father, a man who had always cared for his animals, was gone, eaten by his own pigs. Investigators arrived and were just as baffled. How could this have happened? Pigs, while capable of eating meat, don't usually attack humans unless something has gone terribly wrong. The scene was gruesome, and the local community was left in shock. People who had known Terry couldn't believe that this could happen to someone who had spent his entire life working with animals. There were many theories about what had occurred that day. Some suggested that Terry might have had a medical emergency, like a heart attack, and collapsed in the pen, leaving him vulnerable to the hungry hogs. Others speculated that one of the pigs may have become aggressive, and when Terry fell, The animal's natural instincts kicked in. Pigs are omnivores after all, and if left hungry or agitated, they can become extremely dangerous. But no one knew for sure. What was clear was that Terry Vance Garner had met a terrifying end. The animals he had spent years raising had turned on him in a way no one could have predicted. His family, heartbroken, had to deal not only with the loss of their loved one, but also with the nightmarish way he had died. The authorities decided to euthanize the pigs involved, as they were now seen as a potential threat. The community held their breath, trying to make sense of this tragedy. How could something so ordinary, so routine like feeding the pigs end in such horror? Though pigs may seem harmless, in this case, they had become killers. It was a loss that shook not only his family, but everyone who had ever worked with animals, reminding them that no matter how familiar they are with the animals, there is always an element of risk that can't be ignored. Story 4. Next on the list, Cynthia Lee Gamble was no ordinary animal enthusiast. She was a wildlife filmmaker, someone who dedicated her life to capturing the beauty and power of nature on camera. For years, she had been fascinated by the strength of Bengal tigers. While most people would only dare to admire these dangerous predators from a distance, Cynthia wanted more. She didn't just want to film tigers. She wanted to live with them, understand them, and form a bond that went further than any regular person could imagine. That's why she had decided to keep a Bengal tiger as a pet. For years, Cynthia raised the tiger on her property. To her, this massive wild cat wasn't a deadly predator, but an animal that she had built a relationship with. Cynthia believed that by treating the tiger with respect and love, she could overcome its wild nature. She wasn't naive about the risks. After all, she had spent years observing animals in the wild, but she believed in the power of her bond with the tiger. It was a belief that would cost her everything. In 2006, tragedy struck. Cynthia was performing what had become a regular part of her life, cleaning the tiger's cage. It was a task she had done countless times, and despite the obvious dangers, she felt confident. The tiger, after all, had never attacked her. It had grown used to her presence in its cage, and she had always been careful to respect the animal's space. But on this fateful day, a simple mistake changed everything. As Cynthia cleaned, she accidentally left the door to the cage slightly ajar. It was just a small oversight, something that could happen to anyone, but the consequences were immediate and devastating. The tiger, sensing the opportunity, pounced. In a matter of moments, the situation spiraled out of control. The attack was swift and violent. The tiger's natural instincts took over, and before Cynthia could react, it was too late. She was no match for the 500-pound predator. Despite her years of experience with wild animals, her familiarity with tigers, and the bond she believed she had formed with this particular animal, the tiger's true nature surfaced in an instant. By the time help arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. Cynthia was gone, her body lifeless inside the enclosure. The tiger, the creature she had loved and cared for, had become her killer. For those who knew Cynthia, it was a heartbreaking irony. She had spent her life working to show the world the beauty of animals, particularly tigers, and had believed so strongly that they could be understood and even tamed in some way. But in the end, the very animal she had devoted herself to had ended her life. The news of Cynthia's death sent shockwaves through the wildlife community. It reignited debates about the ethics and dangers of keeping large, wild animals as pets, even by those who were considered experts. While some admired her passion and dedication, others pointed out that no matter how much someone thinks they understand a wild animal, it is impossible to fully control them. Wild animals, especially predators like tigers, are ruled by instincts that can surface without warning. For those who knew her, it was a devastating loss, and in the end, Cynthia's story became a cautionary tale. Story 5. From one big cat to another, Michal Prasek was a man who dreamed of a life most people couldn't even imagine. Living in a small village in the Czech Republic, Michal had always been fascinated by lions. He wanted not just to study or admire them from afar. He wanted to live with them, care for them, and make them a part of his everyday life. So, despite the risks and the warnings from both neighbors and authorities, Michal took a bold step. He acquired 2 lions, a male and a female, and built large enclosures on his property, planning to breed them. For years, Michal's life became centered around these animals. To him, they were not dangerous predators, but domestic pets that he could tame with time, patience, and care. The lions became a sort of local curiosity. People in the village talked about Michal's unusual lifestyle, some in awe, most in fear. Many were concerned about the growing danger that keeping such large, wild animals so close to a residential area posed, but Michal remained undeterred. Local authorities were equally concerned. They made attempts to intervene, trying to enforce laws that prohibited private individuals from owning such dangerous animals. But Michal refused to cooperate. He claimed that his enclosures were secure and that he had full control over the lions. Because the lions were technically on private property and there were no immediate incidents, authorities found themselves powerless to act beyond voicing their concerns. However, those who knew Michal couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before something went terribly wrong. That time came in 2019. One morning, Michal went to check on his lions, as he had done countless times before. He entered the male lion's enclosure without any hesitation. But on this particular day, something was different. The lion, whether provoked by some unseen trigger or simply acting on its natural instincts, attacked Michal with deadly force. The lion mauled Michal, leaving him with no chance to escape or defend himself. The enclosure, which had been designed to keep the lions in, now became a prison for Michal, as he was fatally injured by the very creature he had raised and cared for. His body remained inside the pen with the lion, and authorities were called to the scene. When help arrived, they were faced with an impossible situation. The lion was still inside the enclosure, guarding Michal's lifeless body. The only way to retrieve the body and ensure the safety of the community was to euthanize both the male lion and the female lion in the neighboring pen. It was a tragic and heartbreaking end, not only for Michal, but for the lions as well. Michal's death shocked his village and made headlines around the world. It raised serious questions about the dangers of keeping wild animals in private settings, even for those who believe they have the skill and knowledge to do so safely. Despite Michal's best intentions and his deep love for the animals, the reality was that lions, no matter how long they are raised in captivity, are still wild creatures with instincts that can't be tamed or predicted. For Michal Prasek, his dream of living alongside lions ended in the most tragic way possible. Story 6. From big cats to big dogs, Sandra Piovesan had always been fascinated by wolves. Their beauty, power, and intelligence captured her interest in a way that few animals could. Unlike most people who were happy to just watch wolves from a distance or in wildlife documentaries, Sandra felt a deep connection to these creatures. She didn't just want to study them, she wanted to live with them, to care for them as though they were part of her family. And that's exactly what she did. Living in a rural area in Pennsylvania, Sandra began raising a pack of hybrid wolves. These animals were a cross between wolves and dogs, a blend of wild and domestic instincts. To her, they weren't dangerous, they were just misunderstood. Sandra believed that with the right care, love, and respect, she could create a harmonious relationship with her pack. She saw herself as their guardian, someone who understood their needs better than anyone else. Over the years, Sandra built her life around these animals. Her family and friends worried about the risks, but Sandra was convinced that the wolves wouldn't harm her. She had raised them from pups and believed they saw her as their leader. But hybrid wolves are unpredictable. They keep most of their wild nature, and that wildness can surface without warning, especially when in groups. In 2006, everything changed. On that tragic day, Sandra went into the enclosure to feed her wolves, as she had done countless times before. But this time, something went horribly wrong. Perhaps it was a change in the pack dynamic, a moment of territorial aggression, or simply a surge of wild instinct. What is known is that the wolves, the animals Sandra had trusted for so long, turned on her. The attack was brutal and must have been fast. Sandra had no chance to defend herself. In a pack, wolves act with frightening coordination, and once the attack began, there was no stopping it. Sandra's body was discovered later, inside the enclosure, torn apart by the animals she had devoted her life to. It was a horrific end, one that left her family and the entire community in shock. Investigators arrived and were faced with a grim scene. The wolves were once again seen as the deadly predators they were. The news of Sandra's death spread quickly, and the story worked to launch another fierce debate about the dangers of keeping wild or hybrid animals as pets. Experts pointed out that while wolf-dog hybrids may seem manageable when they are young, they can become highly dangerous as they mature and grow larger and larger. Their wild instincts are not something that can be trained away or fully controlled. Many argued that no amount of love or care could change the fundamental nature of these animals. For Sandra, her love for wolves had blinded her to this reality. She had believed that her bond with the pack would keep her safe, that her role as their caregiver would be enough to tame their wild instincts. But in the end, the wolves followed their nature, and Sandra paid the ultimate price for underestimating the power of that wildness. Story 7. Our next animal lover, Aleta Stacey, was a woman whose fascination with exotic and dangerous animals went beyond the usual curiosity. She wasn't interested in keeping ordinary pets like dogs or cats. Instead, her passion was for creatures that most people would keep at arm's length. She was interested in reptiles and, in particular, venomous snakes. One of the dangerous animals she kept in her home was the black mamba, one of the deadliest snakes in the world. This sleek, fast, and highly venomous serpent has a bite so lethal that without immediate medical attention, death is almost certain within hours. Aleta's love for these animals set her apart from most people. She prided herself on her ability to handle and care for creatures that others would never dare go near. In the close-knit community where she lived, Aleta's collection of dangerous snakes became somewhat of a local legend. Some admired her for her daring, while others worried for her safety and the safety of those around her. But Aleta remained confident, believing she had the knowledge and skill to manage even the most dangerous of creatures. Unfortunately, that belief would lead to a tragic and mysterious end. One day, in 2009, Aleta Stacey was found dead in her home. When authorities arrived, they discovered the unsettling cause of death. She was displaying signs suggesting she had been bitten by her pet black mamba. The black mamba's venom works quickly, attacking the nervous system and paralyzing its victim. Without immediate medical help, survival is nearly impossible. What puzzled investigators, however, was the fact that Aleta had not sought any assistance after the bite. There were no signs that she had attempted to call 911, rush to a hospital, or even administer any first-aid treatments, such as anti-venom, which she should have known about given her experience with snakes. The circumstances surrounding her death raised many questions. Aleta had been extremely knowledgeable about snakes, especially deadly ones like the black mamba. She knew the dangers, and she certainly knew the deadly consequences of being bitten. Yet for reasons no one could understand, she had done nothing to save herself. This led to widespread speculation about whether her death was an accident or something more intentional. Some suggested that Aleta may have underestimated the severity of the bite, thinking she had more time to react. It's possible she didn't immediately recognize how serious her condition was until it was too late. After all, black mambas can deliver what's known as a dry bite, one that injects little to no venom, and maybe Aleta thought she had been lucky. But as the minutes ticked by and the venom spread through her body, paralyzing her muscles and shutting down her respiratory system, any opportunity for survival would have vanished quickly. However, another, darker theory emerged after her death. Some people speculated that Aleta's failure to seek help could have been deliberate, suggesting a possible suicide. Those who knew her described Aleta as someone who lived on the edge, taking risks that most wouldn't dare. Perhaps, some thought, she had reached a point in her life where the dangers she played with every day no longer held the thrill they once did. Or maybe she had been battling personal demons that led her to see the black mamba bite as an opportunity for a dramatic, self-inflicted end. There was no note, no obvious signs pointing to suicide, but the fact she didn't seek any medical help made people wonder. Aleta's death was a tragic ending to a life that had always been lived on the edge of danger. The black mamba, a creature she had once handled with confidence and skill, had turned into the agent of her demise. Her community was left to grapple with the unsettling reality that the very thing she loved most had ultimately taken her life. While she had believed that her knowledge and experience were enough to protect her, the truth was the danger posed by a black mamba. Story 8. In a quiet village in Malaysia, life for a 72-year-old man and his family revolved around the simple yet hard rural lifestyle. He, like many in his village, relied on the natural resources around him, including coconuts. to sustain his livelihood. Coconuts were a valuable crop, and for years, he had trained his pet southern pig-tailed macaque to assist him in harvesting them. It wasn't uncommon in Malaysia for people to use monkeys for this task, as the agile creatures could easily climb tall trees and pluck coconuts faster than any human could. For the elderly man, his macaque had been a helpful, if unpredictable, companion for years. The southern pig-tailed macaque, with its short, sturdy frame and clever mind, seemed like the perfect helper. But despite their usefulness in harvesting coconuts, these monkeys have a reputation for being aggressive and unpredictable, especially as they age. Many in the village knew this, but the man had worked with the macaque for so long that he likely believed he had tamed the animal's wild instincts. However, those instincts would tragically resurface. In 2019, on what seemed like an ordinary day, the man went about his usual routine, preparing the macaque for another day of coconut harvesting. Perhaps he missed a subtle sign of aggression in the monkey's behavior that day, maybe even something that could have been easily overlooked after years of routine. Or maybe the macaque was simply in a mood that no amount of training could have caught. Whatever the reason, as the man approached his pet, the macaque attacked with brutal force. In an instant, the monkey bit down on the man's arm with sharp, powerful teeth. The bite struck an artery, causing catastrophic bleeding. The attack left the elderly man with no time to react. As he collapsed, bleeding from the deep wound, the situation grew even more terrifying. The monkey, still in a frenzy, turned on the man's son, who had rushed over to help his father. In a frantic struggle, the son was also bitten, but he managed to escape with his life, but still seriously injured. Neighbors and family members were alerted by the screams, and help was called. But by the time anyone arrived, it was too late for the 72-year-old man. He bled out from the severe wound caused by the animal he had cared for and trained for years. The authorities arrived, and the scene was both tragic and surreal. A beloved pet had turned into a killer, and the man who had spent years relying on the macaque for help was now gone. The monkey was captured and later euthanized by local authorities. The incident shocked the small village and raised questions about the dangers of keeping wild animals, even those trained to perform specific tasks, as pets. While the practice of using macaques to harvest coconuts is common in certain parts of Southeast Asia, this tragedy highlighted the unpredictable nature of wild animals, especially those like macaques, which can become aggressive as they grow older and more territorial. For the man's surviving family, the incident left a lasting scar. His son, who survived the attack, was not only physically injured, but emotionally devastated by the violent loss of his father. The death also reignited discussions about the ethical and safety concerns surrounding the use of animals for labor, especially when those animals are not fully domesticated. In the aftermath, animal experts stressed that while macaques can be trained for tasks like coconut harvesting, they are still wild animals at heart, driven by instincts that cannot always be controlled, no matter how much training they undergo. Story 9. Back to the States for our next case. Al Abel was a man who had devoted a significant part of his life to caring for exotic animals. He lived in a secluded area in California, where he had created a sanctuary of sorts for various wildlife, including an African Barbary lion named Leo. Al's fascination with lions and his desire to connect with them on a personal level led him to raise Leo from a cub. Over the years, their bond deepened, and many who knew Al admired his dedication to his animals, believing that his experience made him capable of handling the king of the animal world. However, owning a lion, regardless of how well-trained or domesticated it may seem, comes with obvious risks. Lions are wild animals, driven by instincts that can be hard to read and dangerous. Despite Al's love for Leo, the reality of keeping such a powerful predator as a pet was always lurking in the background, waiting for a moment of carelessness or misjudgment. In 2004, that moment came. On a seemingly normal day, Al was performing his regular tasks around the sanctuary, which included cleaning Leo's cage. He had moved the lion to another pen to facilitate the cleaning process, a routine he had likely done countless times before. However, in a tragic oversight, Al mistakenly left the gate open when transferring Leo. The lion, sensing his chance for freedom, quickly seized the opportunity. Without warning, Leo charged at Al. The attack was quick. Although Al had spent years caring for the lion and believed he had a unique bond with him, the animal's wild instincts kicked in, and the ferocity of a predator was unleashed. Al was mauled, and despite any attempts to defend himself or escape, the injuries were catastrophic. Neighbors reported hearing Al's cries for help, but by the time assistance arrived, it was too late. Al Abel had died from the injuries inflicted by the very creature he had spent his life caring for. Following Al's death, Leo was euthanized. Authorities had to make the difficult decision not only for public safety, but also to prevent further incidents involving the lion. People in the animal care community emphasize the importance of respecting the wild nature of these creatures, regardless of how affectionate or tame they may seem. Story 10. In our final and most unusual case, Pam Weaver lived in a picturesque part of Australia where life was simple and close to nature. She had a special love for animals, and her home was filled with various pets. On her 60th birthday, her family surprised her with a unique gift, a pet camel. Initially, Pam was delighted. The camel, named Kebab, brought excitement to her life, and she felt grateful for such a distinctive companion. However, what was meant to be a happy addition to her life soon turned into a tragedy. While camels can be charming and even affectionate, they are also known for their unpredictable behavior. Kebab, the birthday gift, had a history of erratic actions that Pam chose to overlook. Perhaps it was the idea of owning such a unique animal that led her to dismiss the camel's warning signs. At first, everything seemed fine, and Pam enjoyed spending time with Kebab, feeding him, and showing him off to her friends. But as the days turned into weeks, the camel's true nature began to surface. In 2019, the horrifying incident occurred. On that fateful day, Pam was outside with Kebab, tending to him as she had done many times before. But something went wrong. For reasons that remain unclear, Kebab knocked Pam to the ground. The weight of the camel, coupled with its powerful legs, became a deadly combination. Pam struggled to get back up, but Kebab continued to trample her, exhibiting behavior that shocked anyone who knew them. The situation quickly escalated as Kebab even attempted to straddle her, further preventing her from escaping. Neighbors heard Pam's cries for help and rushed to assist, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. Despite their efforts to save her, Pam succumbed to her injuries. The tragedy left the local community in shock, grappling with the grim reality that a pet, a creature that was supposed to bring joy, had taken the life of a beloved woman. Following the incident, authorities investigated the situation, raising important questions about the safety of keeping such animals as pets. Kebab was deemed a danger to others and was subsequently euthanized. This decision was heartbreaking for Pam's family and friends, who had hoped for a different outcome. The incident sparked conversations about animal behavior, responsibility, and the importance of recognizing the potential risks associated with exotic pet ownership. Conclusion. The stories of those who tragically lost their lives at the hands of their pet animals serve as reminder of the clear risks of exotic pet ownership. They still keep their wild instincts, leading to often fatal consequences. From the powerful bite of a black mamba to the sheer force of a trampled camel, these cases highlight the need for owners to stay aware and cautious when it comes to keeping animals outside the typical domestic pets choices. It's obvious that the bond between humans and animals, while often rewarding, must be approached with respect and understanding of their wild nature. In most cases, these animals are better left in their natural habitats rather than in the backyard.